ladies and gentlemen, let me kindly ask you to reconvene in the main hall. We will just about to start the first panel of the symposium, and the title of the panel is Future of the European Union, What to Expect from Central Europe. Let me begin with a couple of words on the future of the EU, because there are a couple of issues on the agenda right now, and it will be very interesting to hear what might be the Central European contribution to these issues and how the Central Europe could contribute to finding some solutions. Of course, that the reform of the common European asylum system is still not finished. There was a much of talk on that during the last June summit, during the June summit of the European Council, but the issue is still not finished, although the V4 prime ministers claimed that they are one team and they won at the summit. All the dossiers are still not completed. Of course, the issue of the reform of the Eurozone is there. The compromise proposals of Germany and France agreed just before the June Council did not please their friends and partners on the north and on the south. So this is another issue which needs to be dealt in the future months. Of course, there is a Brexit and Brexit negotiations. We still do not know where we are going and what will be the future deal. And the multi-annual financial framework negotiations are just about to start, another heavy issue on the European agenda. And then there are just the internal challenges, and of course there are a couple of external challenges. We see now, I would say, the tendency of more fragmentization in the European Union between the East and West and North and South. And the key powers, the France and Germany, are gradually losing their allies. France is losing Italy, which became a complicated actor in the EU and in the coalition making. Similarly, Germany has its troubles with a traditional partner of Poland. And all these issues I mentioned, there is a belief, and I think that the Commission President Juncker stated that in his State of the Union speech, that there is a belief that these issues might be finished, wrapped up by the European elections. Another very important event which will shake up the EU. So there are just a couple of issues we might touch upon on this panel, and I would like to introduce you the panelists. On my right, Monika, Brusenbauch, Meislová from the Department of the International Relations and European Studies at Masaryk University in Brno. Dániel Bartha from the Center for Euro-Atlantic Integration and Democracy from Budapest, Hungary. Milan from the German Council for Foreign Affairs from Berlin, Germany, and Beneš from the Department of the International Relations and European Studies from the Metropolitan University, Prague. My name is Dostál. I'm the Research Director at the Association for International Affairs, and I will chair this panel. And without further ado, I would ask Vítek, what is the Czech European policy state right now, and how the Czechs, you think, may contribute to building the future of the EU.
Thank you, Vítek, for the introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I will take a kind of a broad perspective on the Czech European policy. I'm old enough to provide some kind of maybe broader historical perspective into my presentation. What are the problems of the main problem with the Czech EU policy is, I would say, the lack of interest and lack of debate into broader strategic issues about the future of the EU and the Eurozone as such. We seem to be consumed by discussing, arguing, and polarizing ourselves about issues which are rather minor from the perspective of the Czech Republic, and which are, I would say, temporary. And this is the migration crisis. The migration crisis, of course, it's a huge political issue because it's everywhere in the media. But from the point of view of the Czech Republic, it's not a strategic issue. We don't have refugees. We are not a border country. Still, the migration crisis is becoming what I would say is defining issue. Even within the domestic policy, it's one of the sources of Euroscepticism also among the Czech population. The Czech political elite, but also general public, lacks an interest in broader strategic issues about the institutional structure of the EU, about the kind of economic governance we want to have in the Eurozone. You can again, I'm old enough to remember days when we actually discussed these strategic issues. Just have a look at 10 or 15 years ago, we were discussing whether we want a more intergovernmental Europe or whether we want to move towards some kind of federation. You may remember that this debate was not one-sided, but that all parties, including the Eurosceptics, participate in the debate. Remember that in 2001, the Czech Eurosceptics issued some kind of Euro-realist manifesto. These things no longer happen. We no longer discuss about the big issues, strategic issues, about the institutional reform, about the future of the Eurozone, about the democratic legitimacy. These are important issues because they will influence our power position in the European Union. They will influence whether the EU will be able to survive the populist backlash. They will inform the future of the Eurozone. And again, I would like you to put the current situation of the Czech Republic into the contrast with the past. I would argue that 10 or 15 years ago, we used to have debate about strategic issues, about institutional reforms, about basically what kind of Europe we want, but we'll no longer have that debate. This has serious implications on the Czech domestic political level, on the Czech domestic scene, and of course for our European policy. On the domestic level, because there is no strategic debate about the EU, the debate about the EU has been hijacked by extremes who are abusing the less relevant issues, temporary issues, for driving the Euroscepticism up. Yeah, again, migration crisis. It's a pity that the defining question, the defining feature of the position of Czech population towards the EU is the migration crisis. In the past, we used to argue about the EU, but but our argumentation and our positions for or against the EU were informed by our beliefs with regard to what kind of Europe we want, whether we want more federal, whether we want more intergovernmental Europe. So that was a debate which made sense. Today, our positions towards Europe are defined by what I would say are rather minor issues which are of little strategic relevance for the future of the Czech Republic. And of course, there are foreign policy implications. Because we don't have the debate about strategic issues, we have little to offer to our European partners in the context of the debate for the future of the European Union and the Eurozone. What we are basically doing, we are either repeating some dual and empty recommendations which we know we can never achieve, or we are bandwagoning with others, and in some cases we are providing some creative solutions, but then we are abandoning these proposals. We are repeating the example of the first kind. Repeating positions is our continued argumentation with regard to migration crisis, that the migration crisis should first be solved in the countries of origin. This is completely empty argumentation because it's beyond our reach to do that. We cannot force Libya to build camps on their soil. They already refused some of the ideas the European Union came up with. The example of bandwagoning is our position vis-à-vis the Eurozone crisis. We had little stakes in the dispute at that time between the debtors, between the indebted countries and the countries which were saving the Eurozone. But still, we decided to bandwagon with one side of the argument, with Germany, instead of offering some more creative, more interesting solutions. We had no immediate stake. We did not participate in the rescue programs, but we still decided to bandwagon. In some cases, we offer creative contributions and creative solutions. I would say one of the creative solutions, again, to the migrant crisis was the idea and proposal that the European Union should first secure its external borders, and only then we can discuss about either voluntary or preferably voluntary redistribution of the applicants for the refugee status. What happened today, or in the past few days, that we made a complete U-turn, and today we are arguing that the EU should not involve itself in securing the external borders, because we are officially against the proposals by the Commission, which propose to strengthen the Frontex, both in terms of its competencies and also in terms of the manpower. So what might be the contribution of the Czech Republic? The Czech Republic may raise issues which would help her to secure its strategic interest and at the same time kickstart a debate on the future of the Eurozone, on the institutional setup and on the democratic deficit. What we can do, and again these are probably kind of controversial proposals, with regard to the Eurozone, I think that the Czech Republic should immediately join Eurozone, adopt Euro without ratifying fiscal compact and without ratifying European stability mechanism. This way we would secure our strategic interest of being in, and at the same time we will kickstart the debate whether the economic governance is really good. Because what we did during the economic crisis, we did bandwagon with Germany. We have joined Germany without proper discussion of what the German proposals, which were eventually adopted with some minor revisions, what they mean for the balance of power in the Eurozone, what they mean for the democratic deficit in the Eurozone, what they mean for the future institutional setup. A second contribution, how the Czech Republic, I believe, can contribute to a debate about institutional reform and democratic deficit. I think that the Czech Republic should propose a kind of evolutionary approach to the solving of the democratic deficit problem. And one of the ways we can do that is to argue in favor of allowing European political parties to compete in European Parliament elections. Let's let them compete. We should not force them to do so. But at the same time, we should argue that unless the European political parties compete in the European elections as European political parties, we would consider the Spitzenkandidaten which were nominated by European political parties as illegitimate. Again, this is a kind of a controversial, but an example of a creative proposal that we can highlight, which is of strategic interest for us and for the European Union, and which should kickstart the debate about what kind of Europe we want and how to proceed further. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Vítek. At the beginning, I thought that your usual pessimistic view at the symposium would be today even more pessimistic, but at the end you came up with two interesting suggestions, recommendations, and that would be also a good start for our debate. Milan, you sit in Berlin right now. Right now in Prague, but you usually sit in Berlin. You observe Central Europe from Berlin, or we may also say that Berlin is part of the Central Europe. But what is the view on our countries? You had a visit of the Czech Prime Minister recently, and you hosted him in your institution for a debate. And our president is on his way to Berlin. So do you think that the German audience perceives the V4 as a one block, or how distinct, for example, the Czechs and Slovaks are to Poles and Hungarians? How much was the Hungarization of the Czech European policy noticed in Berlin?
Thank you very much. Sorry. Ďakujem za pozvanie. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be in Prague, a city where I studied or started my university education, but that was in the 90s, when this was still one country, Czechoslovakia. And now, with the 100th anniversary of establishing Czechoslovakia, it's a double pleasure to be here. And also it's a strange feeling when we hosted Prime Minister Babiš at the DGAP, at the German Council on Foreign Relations. I rather decided not to speak because there was enough of a Slovak in the room. So, but these are interesting and confusing times. But more seriously now, I have 4 points to make. One is view from Berlin on Czech Republic and maybe on the region. And I will rather share observations of my German colleagues, what I hear, also on Prime Minister Babiš and his visit. Secondly, the elements of imbalance and continuity or discontinuity in Czech foreign policy under this government, and the general condition of the Visegrad Group. And finally, the upcoming European Parliament elections as a likely turning point for the European project and for divisions in the EU, because I believe, for instance, that the East-West divide, which we feel so strongly nowadays, might lose its potence, or rather, because there will be a reconfiguration of political forces in the European Parliament, there will be new divides, and this one will lose its centrality for Central Europe. So, the view from Berlin on our region is, I would say, rather than a view, it's sometimes a glance. It's a region which has been taken for granted for a very long time, and German policymakers tend to see only the countries that are problems, that create problems, and then they pay attention. So a lot of discussions in Berlin about Central Europe is dominated by Hungary and Poland. And Czech Republic and Slovakia were the two countries that were overlooked from the point, I mean, in case of Czech Republic also because there was a caretaking government. And this series of visits from Czech top officials to Berlin is a long overdue process of reconfirming a strong bilateral relations between Berlin and Prague. Combined with the fact that there is no fully mandated foreign minister in this building for some time, that there has not been a foreign minister since October 2017. A lot has been carried by technocratic level, and I think it was a good job done because the Prime Minister's Babiš's visit was well prepared, and also thanks to that, it was a relative success, I would say, according to my sources. We indeed hosted Prime Minister Babiš for a closed-door debate that lasted 1 hour before his talks at the Chancellery. And the idea was to give him exposure to people to experts from German foreign policy community, high-level people from government, before he talks to the Chancellor. That idea didn't work, because a large part of this 1 hour was taken by the Prime Minister himself. There was some listening and discussion only towards the end, and I don't want to be impolite and indiscreet to disclose anything from that session. I believe in the end it was also useful for the Czech delegation, but I would like to share with you observation of my German colleagues. And it also tells you something about the view from Berlin. Because their first observation was that, oh, this is a pragmatic leader from a region which is taken as which is viewed as a problem region, part of the problem in the EU. So the first impression was, this is somebody Berlin can deal with. Yes, he is a little bit strange, a little bit of his own, but he seems to be very transactional. And in the end, if you look at the region now, what type of governments you have there and who can be allies for Germany, Prime Minister Babiš shines with few others as somebody who does not oppose the EU. At least this is what his message in Berlin was. I'm pro-EU and I will spend some of my political capital and communication skills to sell the EU in somehow a very Eurosceptic country. And because he's transactional, on the EU level, he can be partner of some coalitions. And because also the East-West divide is perceived as a big issue now in Berlin, as an issue on which Germany does not have tools in the European policy as they have tools to deal with, as they have in the Eurozone tools how to deal with the South. But the East is somehow under damage control all the time. So because of all of this, the impression of Prime Minister Babiš was rather positive. Second, there is also an element of unguided missile in the room, because you never know what comes up. He's very sort of mercurial, and even when things are well prepared, it's up to him what he decides that should be said. But also there is some instinct involved, and he understands trade relations and trade patterns and economic relations, and therefore he confirmed that for Czech foreign policy, Germany is a European anchor, it's a priority. And according to my sources, the other priority or vector of Czech foreign policy, Visegrad group, was not even discussed at the Chancellery, at the meeting with Merkel. So, moving on to, I can come back if you want to Babiš's visit, but I think a lot of the meeting at the Chancellery was spent on bilateral issues. And to what extent Czech Republic will continue to be a preferred ally of Germany in the region, I don't know, because it requires political will and engagement from both sides. And there is not a big sort of demand now on either side, I would say. It's rather a relationship that has been set on a good track and is moving on there. But at the moment, I don't see that Germany would expect something extra from Czech Republic in the region or on the EU level. I mean, yes, Chancellor Merkel asked Prime Minister Babiš symbolically to accept a few asylum seekers, but to help her with migration issue at the home and at the EU level. But other than that, there is very little demand beyond the usual EU issues from Berlin. And also from the side of Prague, I don't see a special demand from Germany. The economic relations and trade are so strong that I think joint interest is to keep them moving and to keep politics maybe out of it. Now, the elements of discontinuity and continuity, I already suggested that under the previous Sobotka government, it was clear that at least I understood it as there are three priorities for Czech Republic in the region. It was Visegrad, bilateral relations with Germany, and Slavkov, or the new initiative how to improve relations with Austria, and also to get out of the V4 format only V4, because since 2015 the V4 the brand has been defined only by migration, and rather than constructively, or it was defined by an opposition to something, and in not very in perceptions and stereotypes that are mostly negative and not very superficial. In Brussels or in Berlin, it was defined as opposition also to as Eurosceptic project. And I think Czech and Slovak tandem within the V4 was instrumental in conveying rather more pragmatic and more pro-EU vision of the V4. I'm asked now to what extent this Czechoslovak tandem within the V4 is still a reality, and I think it's over. It's over not only because, and here I will not subscribe to the term Hungarization of Czech foreign policy. I don't think it's precise. I think there will be a more contractual approach-based Czech foreign policy. Part of it will be with Orban, but it's the end of Czechoslovak tandem within the V4 because it seems that the Czech Prime Minister does not need to project other vision of V4 in the EU towards his EU partners. I forgot to highlight that the new factor in the Czech foreign policy is a strong Prime Minister. And even if there will be a fully fledged foreign minister, this will be a Prime Minister's foreign policy to a large extent. And he's new in foreign policy, and he discovered, it seems, Prime Minister Babiš, a new toy for himself. He is learning fast, but also he tries to dominate this, and he's looking for allies. So the key question after all this is who will be his partners on the EU level beyond V4, and sometimes Germany. And that I don't know, which brings me very in a very brief way to my last point about the importance of European Parliament elections in May 2019. If you look at Visegrad countries now, you have two party leaders that are also prime ministers that are dominating their own countries politically, which is Viktor Orban and Andrej Babiš. And then you have two other prime ministers which are not masters of their own. They are not party leaders, Mateusz Morawiecki and Peter Pellegrini. So, and at the same time, Orban and Babiš will also control a contingent of members of European Parliament that is interesting for European political parties, if voters of Andrej Babiš and Ano will come to the elections. So he can be a dealer in this very unpredictable game of reconfiguration of European political parties in the next European Parliament, which will have a strong impact on Brussels system and other institutions, on the Council and especially on the European Commission. And how he will play this game, I think, will define positions of Czech Republic and Andrej Babiš for the next period. And his meeting with Viktor Orban, as far as I know, was also about this, because he got the obvious question is whether he will stay with ALDE, because ALDE can be a kingmaker in the next European Parliament. And he says everything is open. So there is even a tendency to see if he could move to the EPP, which would be important. I don't know whether he can do it without the consent of the current EPP member from this country, which is KDU-ČSL, but these are all things that should be discussed, because in a way we are in a lap, and post-May 2019 we will have very new and interesting situation in which the Czech position will also change. Thank you.
Thank you, Milan. Thank you for sharing with us your observations from Berlin. I'm also glad that you do not share actually my reading of this Czech pivot to Pannonia. Next, I would ask, and you provided a wonderful transition to Dani, because Dani would like to speak about the next elections to the European Parliament. Of course, as you already mentioned, Viktor Orbán is one of those who are preparing something. We don't know really yet what kind of animal is it going to be, but there will be definitely some kind of a reshuffling in the political groups in the European Parliament. So, Dani, what's your view on that?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. Obviously, European parliamentary elections are the ones that will probably dominate the political agenda in the European Union in the next up to 9 months. But still, let me react very quickly to some of the points you've mentioned previously, as I think they are very important for many reasons. One is the lack of strategic thinking that you have mentioned, and I would link this fact that there is clearly a lack of strategic thinking in foreign policy to the fact that Milan highlighted, that basically now a large part of our foreign policy become internal policy of the country and over-politicized. And as foreign policy is decided by prime ministers or even more party leaders of the biggest parties, foreign ministry itself has less and less say on which direction their foreign policy of their country is going. You mentioned, but that leads to a number of mistakes, including mistakes in the in foreign policy of people who tagged as visionaries. I mean, sometimes they saying that Orbán was visionary in a number of questions. I think he is not in many sense, and the latest voting in the European Parliament highlighted it, how much it is not the case. And I would reflect to one thing, one concrete thing you mentioned, joining the Eurozone. Joining the Eurozone would be the most strategic thing Orbán could have done years ago, start to join the process, because a number of reasons. First of all, by joining the Eurozone, Article 7 procedure doesn't even make sense. I mean, it makes sense, but when the country is sitting at the table of the Eurozone, Eurogroup debates, it's very hard to discuss seriously about any Article 7 procedures. Also, blackmailing the country or threatening the country of limiting its own rights in the European Union when they are a member of the Eurozone is small. And also, he could give an answer to those who call him as a Eurosceptic by saying that he is joining something positive, joining the Eurozone is some big European project that Hungary is ready to sign up for that. So for many, many political reasons, it would be very beneficial for him. And still, he didn't launch the process. And I think the threat of not joining the Eurozone will be even higher, because now they will use Eurozone membership negotiations as a blackmailing point whenever they decide to join, and also by other countries joining the Eurozone, the strategic room, the strategic capacity will shrinking for those countries who are not in the Eurozone. So that's very shortly to that. Also, I would like to react very shortly to a German understanding, because I think what you said about Germany thinks that they understand the region and they control the situation. I think that shows that Germany never learned and not learned anything about the last years. We all know Germany is dominated by business interests, and the great decision, or the great, I think, idea of our leaders is that they let the German business blossoming in our countries. They never hurted the German business. They never touched the German business. And actually, the German business is the biggest beneficiary of any EU funds in our region. That makes the pressure in favor of these countries in Berlin quite high, and limits the political maneuvering for the political leadership. So I think this region understands better Berlin than Berlin understands this region. And let me move now to the European parliamentary elections, because the campaign is on, visibly. if nothing else, I can suggest that the fact that nobody talks anymore about the multi-annual financial framework for the last 2 months, but who's the Spitzenkandidat and how will the next European Parliament look like? And one interpretation also now appeared recently in Telegraph, that this is going to be the fight between Macron and Orban. Orban would also like to portray this as such, as it was visible already during the summer when he was basically set the annual direction at his Bajletusnad speech, which is quite famous by now, because that's the place where he usually launches his foreign or political, it talks about his political ideology and long-term goals. And at that speech he was talking about that in 2019 we are not only going to say goodbye to liberal democracy, but to the 86 elites that are built on these liberal democracies. Simultaneously, a number of forces in Hungary and in the European Union are talking about a very strong illiberal threat that will dominate Europe. We have done research with one of my colleagues, Tomáš Boros, recently that we published, and tried to forecast this number of seats and create 2 or 3 actually alternative scenarios with different political groups that could emerge as a result of the upcoming elections. And in any model, we can see that that by far the threat of radical force is not that big. I mean, the trend is clear, but the trend is continuous. It has not changed in the last 10 years. Radical right and radical left is strengthening, but it's not more rapid than before, and their gain in the European Parliament is not greater than before. Still, as the result of the election, what we can see now, the biggest losers will be the European People's Party, the Socialists and Democrats, the European Conservative and Reformists, and the Greens. While the biggest winners, and that contradicts the forecast of Mr. Orban, by far will be the ALDE, and obviously the radical right and the radical left. But in numbers, that's not substantial. What is different in the next European Parliament is that was partially mentioned here, that this will be the first time in history when the European People's Party and the Social Democrats will need a coalition partner that will be most likely the ALDE in order to run the European Union. So what we will see, a more fragmented European Parliament, a European Parliament that will hard in operation. That means also that for the first time they will need more disciplined political groups. Scenes, as we've seen in the Sargentini voting, will not be the dominant ones in the future, because political leaders will have to control more their political groups in order to operate the European Union. That's the future. Also, very important that by the rise of the Eurosceptic groups, they will be close, or they will even reach the 1/3 threshold. Therefore, they will be capable to block a number of procedures, they will be capable to block a number of processes in the European Union. Once again, that will make European Union a harder place to operate. We also see that there will be new radical political groups emerging, not just because Salvini or anybody else is moving accordingly, but because of the number of seats, the changes, the Brexit, and its impact to the political party groups will mean that there should be some concentration in the radical right. That will create new parliamentary groups, and that will change a bit their method of operation in the European Parliament. Also, one implication and possible threat, we've seen potential scenarios, and one scenario was when a group of let's say, Orban and Salvini create a new radical group. If it would be created, it would secure approximately 120 to 125 seats in the European Parliament, and we were kind of optimistic for them. So if they are very good. That also suggests that they will be sidelined that would create a big coalition among the traditional groups that could basically corner them in any important question, and whoever joins this group would be the subject of similar votings that we have seen recently. So it's not really good for anybody who is currently in the mainstream joining a radical group like that in the future. If Macron creates a party, that's also a potential danger for the European Union, because that would even more fragment the center, and it would make even more, even harder for the pro-European progressive forces to form any kind of majority in any questions. A new phenomenon will be, and finally I think I will close somewhere here, I will have one more point on this, that desertion will be punished. Desertion was already punished. That was the Sargentine report about, and that was not a message for, I think, the Hungarian Fidesz, but a rather stronger message for everybody else. Parties like GERB, parties like HDZ, those who would go with such a political group from the mainstream to this new group or to the radical right. And finally, it's worth to mention not only the parliament is divisible, but we will have a new commission, and the council will change because there will be a number of national elections coming as well. In the next commission and council, nor EPP nor Orbán could put together any majority. Even blocking majority will be an issue. So in the council, blocking majority by Prime Minister Orbán and loyal countries such as Poland could be potentially could be constituted on issues such as migration if the Italians would join such a bloc, and Italians at this point would join such a bloc if it would be Mr. Salvini, the next Prime Minister. We see his agenda. He would like to have an early election and he would like to push out the five-star movement, but that scenario only works if he wins and if he is going to be the next Prime Minister. So I think I have to stop here right now, but I'm looking forward to the Q&A part. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. I already have a couple of questions in my mind. But before we dive into a debate, I would like to ask Monika for her presentation on how Brexit may impact the relations between the Czech Republic and the UK, and I believe we should also have a debate on what does it mean for the broader Central Europe, because the United Kingdom has always been seen as a ally of the Central and Eastern European countries in the EU for various reasons. So Monika, please.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me to be here with you today. And when we are talking about the future of the European Union, or rethinking the future, which is the main title of the symposium, it's impossible not to mention Brexit, because with the UK being the first fully fledged EU member state to ever decide to withdraw from the European Union, Brexit constitutes a unique and unprecedented phenomenon which is unparalleled in the history of the European integration. And as such, it has taken EU member states, including the Czech Republic, into an uncharted territory with no historical examples of how the countries should, would, or could take part in such a process. And that's why I'm sure we will hear quite a lot about Brexit here during these 2 days. And I was asked to reflect briefly on Brexit implications for the Czech Republic's foreign policy making and for the bilateral relations between the UK and the Czech Republic. And I'm very glad for this opportunity because since the results of the British referendum were announced, much attention in the public debate has been devoted to terms of Brexit, but much less thought has been actually given to post-Brexit shape of the multi-layer relations between the United Kingdom and the Czech Republic. But first of all, a little disclaimer. Brexit implications are still a matter of significant uncertainty, and that is an understatement. And they will very much depend on the future setup of the UK-EU relations. So Brexit is basically still a moving target, so without an access to a crystal ball, we are still moving in a land of predictions or speculations. But what is certain, however, is that the Czech Republic and the UK have long enjoyed excellent relationship, both politically, economically, culturally, and of course it's important not to overestimate the significance of this relationship, but it's a fairly close, stable, and pragmatic relationship that runs wide rather than deep across many areas of activity and that operates at many levels. After all, the significance of the United Kingdom for the Czech foreign policy was reflected also in the concept on Czech foreign policy, which specifically ascribes an important role to the UK, especially in terms of the common foreign and security policy and the common commercial policy. What is important to keep in mind in this context is that it is the European Union that has been long a significant dimension for the Czech-UK bilateral relations. For the Czech Republic, as Vítek has already mentioned here, Brexit means a loss of its natural ally within the European power game. You know, we have shared a similar outlook on a range of issues, including cautious approach to Brussels overreach, so to speak, attitudes towards nuclear power, or typically pragmatic attitudes towards CFSP and CSDP policies. We have been also drawn to British views on EU economic governance, for instance, cooperating closely in the agenda of enhancing the single market to all economic sectors, or the agenda of further liberalization of the global trade. Also, the UK has been a strong advocate of non-Eurozone countries, and the non-Eurozone countries have already expressed their concerns that they might become sidelined, you know, post-Brexit in a bloc dominated by the Eurozone. Okay, so what does this mean for the Czech Republic? I'd like to emphasize 2 points in particular. First of all, because of Brexit, the Czech Republic is about to lose an important like-minded partner, and its withdrawal will diminish the capacity advocacies of the country. And this will probably necessitate changes in coalition-forming behavior. Within the EU institutions, the Czech Republic will need to seek different allies. It will need to see different coalitions of like-minded partners in order to be able to enforce its interests, because at the EU level, because coordinating in the small groups now seems to be the name of the game. And my second point, I was recently conducting a series of interviews at the ministries for the yearbook and also for my other research, and I came across one interesting aspect. You know, many people actually mentioned that we are a country that has long directly benefited from the wealth of British expertise, be it in the area of environmental protection, security, science, research, and education. And currently the Czech officials engage with their British counterparts at all levels because they are embedded in the policymaking in Brussels. But post-Brexit, this level of kind of automatic contact will not be the same. Maybe some people even talk about kind of de-Europeanization of bilateral relations in this sense. And many people actually worry let alone how and when, this thick network of bilateral consultations, contacts and exchanges will be replicated bilaterally once the UK leaves the bloc. So that was an interesting aspect for me. So to conclude, there is definitely a strong case for close post-Brexit cooperation with the UK along a variety of fronts. By the way, this year marks 25 years since the establishment of diplomatic relations between the UK and the Czech Republic, and next year marks 100 years since the diplomatic relations between Czechoslovakia and the UK were established. So this is actually a perfect time to initiate a debate on further cultivation of the existing Czech-UK links, both within and outside the EU network and framework, so that they do not suffer too much in the turbulent post-Brexit times, so that they do not suffer too much from the reduced contacts in Brussels. Maybe something along the line of the Czech-German strategic dialogue, which was signed in 2015 and which is generally hailed as significant upgrading of mutual relations. Because, of course, the United Kingdom will need to broaden and deepen its bilateral relations with EU27. And of course, realistically speaking, they will need to prioritize some relations over others, for instance, with Germany or France, but we should be prepared for the debate. And, but of course, we've got a single negotiating mandate based on which EU member states negotiate with the UK. So, of course, we need to tread rather carefully here so as not to break ranks with the rest of the EU. Okay, so thank you very much for your attention, and I am very much looking forward to debate afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Monika. It was very interesting to hear about your perspective on the relations between the Czech Republic and the UK and how they became Europeanized. And it seems to me that there will be a need for a new narrative, as you also pointed out. Before I give the floor to the audience and your questions and comments, I would like to ask first Milan, because there are we have talked a lot about European Parliament elections next year. What might be how might the coalitions look like, and who might be the winners and the losers, and also about the candidates for the European Commission presidents. Beneš is one of the critiques of this concept as it stands right now, and we also had already a couple of nominations. Of course, Manfred Weber, but also Maroš Šefčovič, the vice president of the Commission, coming from Slovakia, and he said his nomination as for the candidate for the socialists. So, Milan, how do you see his chances, and who might be the winner of the European Parliament elections according to you?
Well, the chances of Vice President of Commission for Energy, Maroš Šefčovič, to become a next European Commission President are very low. And I would even argue that he didn't push his Spitzenkandidat concept because he thinks he can win. He doesn't think he can win, but this is tactical. This is tactical on several levels. Not unimportant thing is to win the nomination from his home country. And those who know Slovak politics will not be surprised by the fact that there is another potential contender who would like to be nominated by the government, and that's the current foreign minister. So from Šefčovič, it was preempting a potential run by Miroslav Lajčák, who would have maybe higher chances to then be nominated by the socialist group to replace Federica Mogherini as a high rep for foreign policy. In fact, even in the last cycle in 2014, when the Visegrad countries, Visegrad leaders at that time, with Donald Tusk still as one of them, were coordinating their strategy, and they pushed for at least one top job among the five in Brussels. Lajčák back then was mentioned as a possible candidacy, but it was clear that it would go to one of the big EU countries. So now things are different. I don't think a coordinated V4 push would be beneficial because of the dead end and maybe a divide or the there is like a bunker on the EU level to which these four countries got themselves as long as they trigger the brand Visegrad. It doesn't bring you new allies except the new member states. Rather, sort of it has become a synonym of some kind of policies, and I think part of the reason is partly unjustified, but it's also partly the effect of completely inefficient communication from our region, and maybe even there is not wish to do something about it. So this is how I see Šefčovič's candidacy, that this is an attempt to step out of the Visegrad bubble, but I would say that his candidacy for, or his bid for Spitzenkandidat within the socialist group would be more successful if he gets behind him at least one of the socialist parties in the strong EU countries, which will bring a lot of votes into European Parliament, like the Italians or the Spanish socialists that are now in power in Madrid. And this is not the case at the moment. Now to comment Dani, if I may, to comment very briefly on Dani's prediction and your research about the future potential grand coalitions in the European Parliament, or the setup of the political forces there. I think one thing is already clear. Who are the winners? You can say who are the winners of this game before it even started. And one of them is Macron, I think. Because not that we would know what will be his end game and his beginnings when he sent emissaries even to this country and elsewhere to look for potential partners from En Marche, were, I think, a failure. This was not everything that Macron is doing is thought through, and he might still squander it. But at the moment, he started to think among the leaders about this in advance, and he's scheming with ALDE to really become a kingmaker, which means that in a system or in the parliament which will be more fragmented, which would threaten the whole modus operandi in Brussels, in the Brussels system, which, you know, in the situation where you can have a dysfunction of the EU decision-making system after the elections, then he will have a premium, and he will increase his leverage over Chancellor Merkel and over Berlin. So I would argue that Macron seems to be now positioning himself well, and he will be one of the winners. The second winner will not be a political leader, it will be an institution, European Council. Because European Parliament will undermine itself so much by being fragmented that the power will continue to shift to European Council. And therefore, just to underline what Dani said, therefore it will give a premium, a bonus in the Brussels system to leaders that are leaders of the party, that are prime ministers in the council, and also, or presidents, and who sits in the European Council, and also have some contingent of votes in the European Parliament. Now back to Babiš quickly. This could increase potential maneuver or a space of maneuver for ANO and for Prime Minister Babiš and for Czech Republic. But I'm skeptical there, because you then have to ask yourself, so what are there is a lack of issues. You can ask, what is his vision of the EU and what are the issues that he's pushing? I'm not an expert on this. You can, nobody's. You know, I stand to be corrected, but the only issue I remember from Prime Minister Babiš, important EU issue that he pushes, is this carousel tax, something about value-added tax that is too technocratic, and it's, you know, not even a B issue, it's a C issue. So there will be lack of issues for him, because you build coalitions around important EU issues. And also there will be, I think, lack of strong veteran MEPs, because you need a good parliamentary club there in that very peculiar system in European Parliament. Telička, and look at ANO caucus now. Telička is a traitor. Now there is somebody upcoming and with a very good reputation. Tita Charanzová is a deputy chair of one important committee. But on the vote of Sargentini report in Hungary, she was publicly, you know, thrown out of the bus by the prime minister. And will they stay in the ALDE, where they have built their, you know, their political points and networks and so on? It's unclear. So I am afraid that the future ANO caucus, we don't know how strong it will be, will start from a very weak point. And yes, there will be a disproportionate leverage to these political leaders and potential disruptors, and therefore I think Orban's plan is smarter and is more dangerous for the EU. I think if you want a weaker EU, you would say that, you know, he's your champion. But I think what he wants to do to achieve an informal coalition across political parties is something that is more realistic and depends on how he plays his cards, also within the EPP. And there, I would say that he can overestimate himself, because one thing he's not good at is coalition building on the EU level beyond Visegrad. And rather than Hungarization of Czech foreign policy, what I would argue is that what we see is Hungarization of Visegrad Group. So.
Which we are part of. Vítek, would you like to comment on the potential winners and losers in the next term of the European Parliament, not only about the political groups, but also about the concept of the Spitzenkandidaten itself? Because if the Europe is more fragmented right now, the whole concept has even less sense than it had 5 years ago, also the game between the institutions. Milan pointed out that the European Council would be the winner in the next term. So what it might mean for the European Commission? Juncker said that he would have a political commission. Do you think that the next commission could be less political, more political? Would it be in the interests of the Central Europe or Central European leaders or not? Pick anything.
Again, my comment would be from a rather broader perspective. You have mentioned that the European Parliament will be undermined because it will be fragmented. It was mentioned in the discussion. Again, my argument is that the European Parliament undermined itself by pushing for the concept of Spitzenkandidat before the consolidation of the system of European political parties and before the idea of European political parties candidating and competing in European Parliament elections has been properly introduced. My take is that the European Parliament is so preoccupied by the power struggle between the European Union institutions, between the European Parliament, the European Council, which has been established as a new institution, and of course the old competitor, the Council of Ministers, that it forgot to secure the rear, so to say, to secure some kind of legitimacy in the light of the general public. And what we see today is our Spitzenkandidaten which lack legitimacy. You know, look, what's the Juncker's legitimacy in the eyes of Hungarian voters? You know, technically speaking, all of them voted for Juncker, but you know, who voted for Juncker? Which Hungarians feel that the Juncker represents them? And have a look at the games we have been discussing about you know, closed-door discussions with regard to which national political party will be kept within the European political parties. I think all these things look disgusting in the eyes of the voters, and these are the things that eventually would push the voters away from the European Parliament elections. Look, for decades we have been criticizing the Council of the EU, the Council of Ministers, for being untransparent, illegitimate, of doing big deals away from the side of the public. But the disease is spreading to the European Parliament. With these games we are discussing, with these games we have been witnessing basically in the previous week, with the push to oust Orban out of the EPP, and with the elections, who will join whom after the elections. So again, let's talk about my take is let's talk about the more fundamental issues, and really the contribution of the Czech Republic is to rise up and say, hey, we think that the Spitzenkandidaten process is like pushing the cart ahead of horses, and we believe the whole Spitzenkandidaten process is illegitimate for the basic fact that the European political parties are not on the ballot. And let's sort, you know, it's up for the European political parties and their national counterparts to discuss whether they would let the European parties run in the European parliamentary elections or not. Let's sort them out. It's up for ALDE and Babiš to discuss whether Babiš will let ALDE compete in Czech European parliamentary elections. It's up to them. Let's not put it as an obligation for the European political parties to compete in the EP elections. But as long as they do not compete elections, let's say that the Spitzenkandidat is illegitimate.
Danny, you wanted to react?
Yes, I wanted to highlight how much you agree with on this whole Spitzenkandidat madness we're already witnessing. But that whole system, I mean, it's very highly beneficial for many now, and I think it was a perfect opportunity to Angela Merkel to prove how much she's a genius in politics by nominating Manfred Weber as a Spitzenkandidat. Because if you see the previous months, who were the ones who openly said that they are not really accepting the Spitzenkandidat system? It was Macron and it was Merkel. So the likelihood of the capability of the Spitzenkandidat system that it will survive is minimal. But still, she nominated a political challenger to be the Spitzenkandidat of the EPP, or supported his nomination. And what did it mean in practice? There will be likely other nominations as well. So Manfred Weber was basically forced to move to the centrum, making a change in his policy and turning against Orban. So he had to highlight that he is not supporting the radical right wing of the European People's Party, and had to show that to gain support from the center and liberal forces of the EPP, to limit the chance that Michel Barnier or Alexander Stubb will run as a contender in the European People's Party. So Angela Merkel already weakened one of the challenger, Orban. Then there will be elections in Bayern. We already know that CSU will be much weaker. We don't know if the current leadership will have to step down or not. So there is still a likelihood that Manfred Weber have to get out of the race, go home, and and rearrange his own party, because the party might go into a serious crisis. Still, if he's not doing it and manage it to the end, to the final, then we know already that it's highly questioned, as you said, that in a coalition meeting where ALDE and Socialists both will have to agree to vote for the new commission, everybody will accept Weber. Most likely not. And even though if it goes through the parliament and we are standing there in front of the council, there is already an example when even the own party is not voted for a council nominee, and you mentioned Juncker. Orban has not voted on Juncker previously, although it was the nomination of his own party. So we have an example, even the chance, even for EPP, not voting for their own candidates at the final. So it's bad from every direction, and we are getting to an interinstitutional crisis because European Parliament doesn't want to drop this at all. Seemingly the European Council is not accepting the system. So there will be a very large clash, and I don't see the European Parliament can win this fight at this point.
Thank you, Danny. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got around 20 minutes for your questions, comments, and I would suggest that we pick up more questions. Please, over there. If you could introduce yourself
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Zsajke Jámbor Miniska, and I'm coming from the Hungarian Echo TV, which is a news channel, and we are going to produce a new TV program about the V4 cooperation, and that's why we are here. And I wrote down basically 3 important questions. And the first one is that I've heard that Mr. Babiš said that I stand behind Orban, we are allies, said Andrej Babiš. What is your opinion over the Sargentini report, and especially on how is it possible to change the rules of the voting right before the procedure, and do you think it's the sign of the lack of democracy that they could change the rules right before the voting? The second question is that I've heard Mr. Nietzsche, if I pronounce your name right, I'm sorry, that you use the expression ally many times, and you are not the only one. So many people use the words allies and enemies within the European Union. So many people use it in politics nowadays. And what do you think? What kind of future the EU can have if nowadays so many people talks about allies and enemies instead of a homogenic power in the world politics? And well, maybe it's too hard to ask, but do you think is the EU on the verge of collapse? And my last question is to Monika about the Brexit, that because so many people from this region, all the V4 region, goes to work to Great Britain, and I'm completely sure that Brexit has a big impact on their life. What do you think that what is going to happen to these people who work in Great Britain from the Czech Republic and the other countries? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Seike. Over there, question, please.
Hello, my name is Jan Michalčák. I'm a researcher at University College London and Leiden University in the Netherlands. My question is somewhat similar to the one just asked. You mentioned in your speeches that probably one of the ways that people like Andrej Babiš could, or Orban could improve their image in the EU would be through pushing for further integration, such as by adopting the euro, to kind of silence the critique that might be coming at them for not being constructive enough. But I was wondering, how realistic do you think those proposals or potential movements toward further integration in the EU from people such as Babiš and Orban are? Because we've seen their stringent critiques of strengthening the common defense of borders just yesterday and 2 days ago in Košice. We've seen their critiques of adopting the euro, or when we were talking about the possibility of imposing European-wide candidate list in elections, it was Babiš himself who criticized the idea of splitting the seats of former UK MEPs and devoting some of those seats to common candidate lists. So there was again a negative stance from people such as Babiš, and I've not seen many constructive proposals from those people. So how do you see the future of integration when we have people like Babiš and Orban within the EU? Thank you.
Thank you. Question noted. Is there a third question we could pick? Okay, over there, please.
Hello, my name is Anna Kratochvílová. I'm from the British Embassy, Prague, and I wanted to ask, it's probably on Mr. Bartha and Ms. Meislová, how will the loss of the British MEPs further affect the European Parliament, especially the loss for the Social Democrats? Thank you.
Okay. We've got a couple of questions. I would perhaps ask first Monika, because there was one question on the future Brexit deal and the impact of the labor force in the UK, and again on the reconfiguration of the European Parliament without the UK.
Okay, so thank you very much for those very interesting questions. What happens to people working, studying and living in the UK from the Visegrad group after Brexit? Yeah, this is a very difficult question, obviously, and it will very much depend on the future setup of UK-EU relations. There is a huge number of people living in the UK coming from Visegrad group. The British decision to open its labor market as soon as 2004 resulted in 1.2 million people from the Visegrad group countries coming to work In the UK, we also know that the issue of intra-EU migration, of course, resonated very strongly during the pre-referendum campaign. There is definitely a lot of uncertainty. We know that they have become a target of some hostile, negative, attacks in the very wake of the British referendum. So I do not dare to really predict what will happen. The issue of protection of EU citizens, there has been quite a lot of agreement on this issue, but we know that there is currently a lot of talk about the no-deal Brexit scenario. So in that case, of course, this part of the withdrawal agreement or the whole withdrawal agreement would not materialize. But what is interesting is that this protection of citizens coming from Visegrad Group countries working, living and studying in the UK, it's actually one of the very few priorities that the Visegrad Group as a whole can agree upon vis-à-vis Brexit. This was also mentioned by Vítek, and it's interesting to see that many researchers and observers, they emphasize the potential of Brexit for the Visegrad Group to punch above its weight, to better secure its interests or to contribute more prominently to the shaping of the future of the EU. And the Visegrad Group leaders, they certainly do have this ambition. There was quite a strong rhetorics when they explicitly listed as they aim to table some common proposals to work out some common positions. But so far, it's only the protection of their citizens and the indivisibility of the EU for fundamental freedoms that seems to be the central priority that they agree upon. But apart from that, there seems to be only a very little consensus. It's mainly just the back to basics approach, or the ever attractive idea of empowering national parliaments that seems to be the priority. So this issue is definitely very much emphasized. Otherwise, the goals are really broad-based and kind of vague. And of course, there is a lot of explanation for this. We've got a single negotiating mandate. We've got the big differences within the Visegrad Group when it comes to the big questions of EU reform or the future of the European Union. Then there is also the sheer complexity of the withdrawal negotiations, which make it difficult to accommodate Brexit as a whole, as such, into the current scope of the Visegrad Group multilateralism. Maybe for the Visegrad Group, which by its definition deals with law politics, Article 50 withdrawal negotiations are perhaps too big bite to chew.
Thank you, Monika. The Sargentini report and where the EU is going to collapse. Milan, would you?
So, the vote on the performance of Hungary, or Article 7 on Hungary in the European Parliament, initiated for the first time by the European Parliament a few days ago. And Czech Prime Minister Babiš, well, he said that he stood behind Orbán's government, but his MEPs voted for the report. So, it tells you that he doesn't understand how the EU works. And also that the relationship between the two prime ministers, Orbán and Babiš, is not so intensive as one might think. Whether they are allies, Mr. Babiš is very contractual, so they are allies on some things. I think, for instance, in recent days, Viktor Orbán convinced Czech Prime Minister Babiš to sway his voice against Frontex. Right? Viktor Orbán has been talking about Frontex for a long time. For him, it's a danger. Frontex would be helping the NGOs and so on, and he doesn't want to let Frontex as an EU agency to borders of Hungary. And he convinced Prime Minister Babiš, not others in the Visegrad Group, I think Poles who are hosting Frontex are not decided, Slovaks are not decided, that this is danger. So he has some influence, but are they allies? Well, where was Hungarian Prime Minister Orbán yesterday? If I follow news well, he was in Moscow. He's meeting Russian President Vladimir Putin twice a year because they have joint projects like Paksh 2, the nuclear power plant being constructed by Russians for the money from Russian budget as a loan. there is a project in this country to replicate this model for nuclear power plant in the Czech Republic, and it's being pushed from the castle. So is Babiš part of this project? It seems that he tries to oppose it. So they are not allies on this. Future of the EU, allies and enemies. Yes, there is diminishing trust or even evaporating trust among leaders and countries, and the evaporating solidarity, political solidarity. Now, this is a fact, but who has pushed the EU this way? I mean, there are hardly more leaders that try to push this way than Hungarian leader Viktor Orbán. So the fact that the EU is weaker is also partly, I mean, it's a 10 million country, Hungary, so I don't want to overestimate it, but it's partly the result of Viktor Orbán's strategy, because he wants to have, I believe, a weaker EU and have a more maneuver, space of maneuver for his government in Hungary. He doesn't want EU institutions to meddle into his government system inside, and therefore he just don't want to be blamed for it. So he wants weaker EU, but he doesn't want to be blamed for, you know, disrupting it and so on. And finally, to your questions, constructive EU proposals. I remember times 3-4 years ago when Visegrad group at the prime minister's level before EU summits was a place for constructive proposals to push some ideas, agendas with other EU allies. It's no longer there because this is age of populism and our leaders are somehow in the forefront. But unfortunately, my big question is whether Visegrad as a brand will recover from this era. In the eyes of public opinions in the other countries, there was a very nasty cartoon in Handelsblatt. So yes, I subscribe to the fact that German business loves Central Europe because they have very good tax systems provided by also Orban governments. But at the same time, the view of business and of the public opinion, not even leaders, is very sort of not very, I would say, putting a lot of shame on us as completely self-interested, egoistical societies that only want EU funds and money. And the next battle in the EU, within the context of the European Parliament, is the EU budget, the EU cohesion funds. We are not playing our cards well.
Thank you, Milan. Vítek, Dani, would you comment on this contradiction? Because you mentioned some kind of proposals which would mean actually more integration of the Czech Republic joining the Eurozone, or the same thing in the case of Hungary, which would be actually, in your view, smart for our national leaders to do. But there is this contradiction because they are not doing that, and there is a public, the public opinion does not want them to do that actually. So is there a way out of that, or do you think that they might review their opinions on that?
I actually believe that my controversial proposal regarding the Eurozone is the only way how to convince the public to join the Eurozone. As you remember, I proposed joining the Eurozone without ratifying the fiscal compact and the European stability mechanism. With regard to the Eurozone and to the being a more pro-integrationist or less pro-integrationist, you have mentioned that the idea that we should join the Eurozone as a way to improve our image. I strongly oppose the idea of doing something as a way of proving that we are pro-European as a way of improving images. I propose joining the Eurozone for strategic reason and as a way how to disrupt and provoke debate within the European Union about some long-term consequences of the current model of Eurozone governance as such. So the problem with Babiš actually is that he's so much concerned with how the Czech Republic is perceived. It may be a good thing because it's one of the things that prevents him from being too Eurosceptic, so to say. But in the long term, it's very damaging. I think it's a pity that the Czech Republic let herself be maneuvered into a position where it must prove its pro-European credentials. I think it's a pity that the main discussion, the only strategic discussion we currently have in the Czech Republic is the discussion whether we want or whether we should be in the European Union, whether the government is pro-European or not. It's a pity because it prevents us to set the agenda and come up with some proposals. I think it was a huge mistake from Babiš to put the idea that we are pro-integrationist and pro-European as a main idea of his speech in front of the ambassadors. It's a pity that we let ourselves maneuver into the position where we need to answer the question whether we want to be in the EU and whether we are pro-European. It's a pity that the main message that Babiš carries to Berlin when he talks with Angela Merkel is the idea, look Angela, we are pro-European. Because this leaves, it leaves no room for more substantial ideas we can come up with. And it's also dangerous because it puts us into a trap domestically. If we stick to the debate, if we keep spinning the debate in the Czech Republic whether we actually want to be in the EU or not, let's forget the debate. Let's answer a no comment answer to the question by journalists: Are you pro-European or not? Will there be a Czechia? Let the answer be no comment, rather than elevating the question during the speech in front of ambassadors and in front of meeting foreign leaders. It has strategic implications. Look, if Orbán comes to us and if he asks us, are you our allies or not? It's useless to ally with something unless we have a vision of what we want to achieve with the alliance. Because if we ally with somebody, and we say, we are your allies, without adding what is the alliance for, then we are implicitly assuming and taking over the strategic goals of the other person. And Orbán does have strategic goals, in contrast to Babiš. He has a vision. We can discuss whether it's a good or bad vision, but he's one of the few Central European politicians who has a strategic vision, who knows what kind of European Union he wants. That's why his status is elevated to the level that we talk about the fight between Macron and Orbán. It's not just because of his Brussels bashing. It's also because he has certain vision of what kind of future European Union he wants.
Thank you. Danny, your comment on that? Last remarks.
Thank you very much. I disagree with your starting question, I think, Vitek, because there is a strong difference between the two governments. The Babiš government would like to see as is probably less Eurosceptic, to simplify it, than the population. In Hungary, the population is more pro-integration than the government itself. So that gives a bit more maneuvering space, I think, to the Hungarian government to join certain European initiatives. The Eurozone is mainly blocked by the central bank governor, who is very influential within the governmental leadership, while the Ministry for Economy would support it. So there is an internal clash on this question already in the leadership. But there are a number of other things that would also Babiš and Prime Minister Orbán would support on a positive agenda, such as the creation of European armies he mentioned several times. So I think it would be smart to move integration forward that way, not only by these countries, but for the bigger allies. French are natural allies in that. But also Germany, because if they would like to have these countries on board, then they should respect that that when they have a pro-European, pro-integration agenda, it would be good to subscribe for that and support that as much as they can for the sake of inclusion. But finally, I think it also partially answers one of the questions to see how different this region to the rest of the Europe, I would like to have use one number. As a result of the European Parliamentary elections, if all the mandates would be distributed to the European Parliament from this region, the European People's Party and the ECR would have a 2/3 majority. And that suggests that we are highly different in thinking and in our approach about Europe, and that is unlikely to change in the short term. One final remark, as V4 was mentioned, what we can see, V4's European agenda will slowly diminishing because even if V4 is marked as a toxic brand in Brussels, there is one important thing. V4 works only in anonymity, and we clearly see that there are member states of the V4 who doesn't like to see this continuing in Brussels, who doesn't like to see that V4 has a strong European agenda, and those member states of the V4 will block to have a strong European agenda for the regional cooperation, and therefore V4 is going to go back for more this regional cohesion infrastructure project mode that was it previously for a while, because clearly as long as the Slovak government is there, they will try to block to have a very visible European agenda in the upcoming years for the V4. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Ladies and gentlemen, we tried to sketch out what might be the Central European contribution for the future of Europe. We very much centered it around the next elections to the European Parliament, and I believe that were very interesting insights from various capitals and on various issues. Let me thank to the panelists Monika, Brusenbauch, Meislová, Milan, Dániel, Bartha, and Beneš, and please join me in an applause for them.